Secondary Succession in Point Pleasant Park: Urban Forest Recovery Post-Hurricane Juan by William Cregan, Ethan Rye, and Ryan McDonald.
Point Pleasant Park is located at the southern end of Halifax, Nova Scotia. In 2003, Hurricane Juan stormed through Halifax, causing significant damage. Hurricane Juan brought heavy winds and rain that altered many ecosystems. For example, it uprooted thousands of trees, altering the forest landscape. Some major factors that altered the forest was the removal of the forest canopy, which increased sunlight, and without trees, there is no shade, which dries out the soil and limits nutrient availability. However, on a positive note, there has been signs of slight recovery, especially since some of the soil has remained intact, which allowed plants and shrubs to slowly rebuild over time. This damage from the hurricane shows forests are resilient and interconnected, as they can overcome many obstacles that have significant impacts. Point Pleasant Park is located on the Mi'kmaq territories, which ancestors were here before us. They used this land for many reasons. They specifically used it for travel and the collection of natural resources. Today, Point Pleasant Park is a place where many people come to enjoy and connect with the land. It mainly consists of spruce, hemlock, and a few sugar maples, with a large variety of other plants. Forests that consist of diversity will help individuals understand how ecosystems respond to disturbances. Following many disturbances, species now must compete for many resources as they are limited, especially plants as they require lots of sun, water, and space. The competition between the different plants is noticeable, which affects their reproduction and survival rates. Interspecific and interspecific competition also occur. As all species require light, water, and nutrients, after a disruption, resources have to be found, so those who have the highest survival of the fittest will succeed. In our experiment, we will be examining the effects of Hurricane Juan on Point Pleasant Park by answering some questions. The first question is, how has the overall forest community changed over time, and what can you predict will happen to the overall community as the forest moves towards its climax community? Second question is, how has the density dominant species in 2004 as well as the dominant species in 2025 changed over time? What can you predict will happen to the dominant species as the forest moves towards its climax community? And the third question is, how will the chosen community metric change over time, and what can you predict will happen to the chosen community metric as the forest moves towards its climax community?
All right, let's get into the methods used by this study back then in 2004. So, to get into the first part, the location. Selected for this study, the highest impact sites in Point Pleasant Park were selected, and you can see here um, there's 6 locations in the southernmost part of Point Pleasant Park. These sites were selected in 2004 by BIAL 2060 Introductory Ecology and has been analyzed every year until now, 2025. The first metric looked at was tree density. This was done per species for each tree of each species. The exact methods used to measure tree density was not shown in the study metrics. However, this could have included fixed area plot method, prism sampling basal area, or belt transect. And then tree identification was also used to determine the individual species. Next was tree size. This was done by measuring diameter at rest height, or DBH, in centimeters, and this was used on all trees, all living trees, greater than 2.5 centimeters of diameter. This was this was done using a diameter measuring tape, and it's done 4.5 feet from the ground. And the reason that DBH was used is because this is a good measurement for measuring uh, the actual volume of solids of wood, and it's also an industry standard. Next up, we have the data analysis. After collection, the data was collected into an Excel file, and this was used to make some graphs following the metrics of Shannon diversity, species richness, P-lose evenness, total density, DBH, and the quantity of red spruce and red maple. You can see here some of the graphs made as well were to determine the statistical significance of the change over time. Second to this, these graphs and the collection of data was used for reporting. So each year, students report on the findings year by year in presentations, and they aim to answer questions about secondary succession. The PPP stats results 2025 fall show statistical significances, and the graph here shows the Shannon diversity, which is one of the graphs not used in our 3 questions. All right, here we get into the results and discussion. So here we're going to answer the 3 questions individually.
The overall forest community has changed over time. The density graph shows a predominant increase in tree density over time. The regression line y equals 7.9285 x minus 15894 signifies that there's a positive trend of 8 trees per 400 meters squared per year. The r squared value signifies that approximately 45% of tree variation is explained by time. As the tree density continues to increase, you can see that the forest is becoming more clumped together, which suggests a secondary succession as the trees are recovering from Hurricane Juan. The DBH graph shows a decrease in tree trunk size as the years go on. This negative trend isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just means there are more small trees than big trees. This graph suggests that DBH decreased by about 0.33 centimeters per year. Y equals minus 0.3308x plus 673.69. Additionally, the r-squared value of 0.1491 shows a weak relationship between DBH points on the graph, which indicates a downward trend. This is happening because of secondary success, typically after a significant disturbance to an ecosystem, which allows for colonization between plants, trees, and shrubs. It also allows species to establish fast and grow quickly. Trees tend to come back, which increases the tree densities, which will fill the space that was destroyed by the hurricane. Based on the graphs, we can conclude that an increase in density and a decrease in DBH signify resources are still limited and organisms are competing for them. As the forest moves towards its climax community, I think the graphs switch. I think density will start to decrease because everything eventually levels off and it can't grow forever. Some trees will end up dying, and competition between the trees will increase, whereas DBH will increase because the trees that survive the longest will grow larger and fill the open gaps, and the forest will shift from all the same old smaller trees to bigger trees over time, and that will allow for the DBH to increase.
To understand how the dominant species have changed since 2004, the density of red spruce and red maple was analyzed. Both species demonstrated a significant increase in density over time. Red spruce, a shade-tolerant species, showed a significant positive trend. Red maple, which has intermediate shade tolerance, exhibited a significant and steeper increase. This rapid growth likely occurred because Hurricane Juan opened the canopy, drastically increasing sunlight and reducing competition, which allowed both shade-tolerant and intermediate species to flourish in the newly available space. As the forest moved toward its climax community, it is predicted that the density of intermediate and shade-intolerant species will decline, while shade-tolerant species, like red spruce, will ultimately dominate. This shift is expected because the canopy will eventually close, reducing light to the forest floor, and creating an environment where only shade-tolerant seedlings can successfully survive and regenerate.
All right, first community metric to look at is going to be species richness. Species richness basically just means the amount of species found in each plot. So these plots being 400 meters in area. So in Point Pleasant Park, we can very obviously see that from 2004, secondary succession has taken place, and many of the species have returned. So starting in 2004, it was measured at some of the sites anywhere from 1 to 4 different species. And now in 2025 and from 2015, we've reached a peak of around 14 to 8 to 14 different species per plot. This can be explained simply by the fact that many of the trees in Point Pleasant Park were killed after the hurricane. And over time, with human help, there has been succession of different species returning artificially as well as naturally from secondary succession of these species. The next community metric that we're going to look at is Pailu's evenness. Pailu's evenness basically just represents how equal the range of species quantities are. So a quantity of 1 means that species are exactly even. There's no variation in the numbers. And 0 means very ranged. We see here that there's a decent slight decline in Pailu's evenness, and this can be explained by the fact that rare species throw off evenness, because if there is a single species that is uncommon to the area, it will decrease the evenness. I can estimate that in the future, this number will probably flatten out and stop declining as steadily, as there's only a certain number of species that can survive the area, so there's less chance that this occurs.
The trends in the collected data and ecological succession theory indicate that the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant Park is currently in a mid-successional stage. The pioneer species that initially dominated after the hurricane are now competing as the canopy begins to close, moving the ecosystem toward a more mature state. However, because this is an urban park, natural succession is altered. First, park management often requires clearing, deadfall for public safety, which removes essential nutrients and microhabitats that naturally regenerating trees rely on. Second, heavy foot traffic on trails causes soil compaction, which can restrict root growth and change water infiltration, ultimately dictating which species can successfully establish to assist in the park's recovery to a mature Acadian forest. Two-eyed seeing can be applied, integrating Western scientific data with the traditional ecological knowledge of the Mi'kmaq Nation. By understanding how the Mi'kmaq historically interacted with and utilized these specific plant communities, management plans can be guided to cultivate and protect native species that hold both ecological and cultural significance. Finally, here are the references used to support the research and analysis, formatted in CSE style, including primary literature that help contextualize the findings on shade tolerance